I've been working on this video for like 2 weeks, and I'm a little sick, and I didn't want to record it before Thanksgiving, because I want to do my next video on the Pokemon games, which I'll beat over Thanksgiving, and I want to really deep dive into those, but I need to get this video out first, and so you're gonna have to deal with sick voice. Alright, let's do this. Ghosts! Oh shit, that was so bad. Ghosts! They're fun, and they're spooky, and they're a staple of fantasy horror. But what if you want to run a standard ghost in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? Just don't. This is either a TPK waiting to happen, or the most boring session of your life. And why these extremes, you ask? Well, because ghosts are poorly designed. I was in this situation not too long ago as the DM. This video is mostly targeted at DMs to tell them don't use ghosts and to explain a couple of the problems with them and a little bit of deep dive into D&D mechanics, so we're gonna have a fun time with it. But why are ghosts anti-fun? Why are they so awful? They're a higher challenge rating undead creature, which are good for campaigns where you might want to run your players against a higher challenge rating undead at some point, say a lich or something. I've been running a campaign where the end goal is going to have them fighting a lich, and so I've been using a lot of undead creatures to kind of set the scene, you know, a lot of zombies, a lot of shadows, and I was like, okay, let's just run a standard ghost, and it didn't work so well. I downed 2 players and actually killed one. Let's start from the top of their stat block. They have an AC of 11, 45 hit points, and a fly speed of 40 feet. They're squishy, but they move fast, except for they aren't really squishy because they have resistances to acid, fire, lightning, thunder, and bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical sources. They also have immunity to cold, necrotic, and poisoned as conditions, so that's a lot of immunities and a lot of resistances. Your players are probably going to have a relatively hard time getting past that, especially at maybe around level 4 or 5, where you'd expect to be fighting a challenge rating 4 creature like this. That's mostly just the list of the entire elemental system in D&D for resistances. It leaves only radiant, force, psychic, and magic weapon attacks untouched, and D&D is very much balanced around magic items kind of being an extra thing, so yeah, they're pretty hard. It effectively gives them an extra 20 or so hit points that they wouldn't have otherwise, especially seeing that force and psychic damage are some of the least used types in the game. They're just running with more HP. The AC of 11 is still working against them for the most part, but we'll talk about why that really doesn't matter. Additionally, ghosts get the ability to see into the ethereal plane and have the ability to walk through walls. Seeing the ethereal plane is interesting, but mostly useless on its own. I want to say it's there for some flavor text, and I can 100% see players using it in fun and interesting ways, especially if you combine it with the other abilities a ghost has. On the other side of things, walking through walls is extremely useful, but can be kind of metagamey as a DM if all you're doing is going back and forth through a wall to hit somebody. Think walk through wall, hit somebody, walk back through wall. I think this is an interesting way if you want to use ghosts to chase somebody through a maze or winding ruins, as they can kind of be an unstoppable force. The ghost can always be following the players no matter what doors they shut or turns they make. It can basically make a beeline straight through the maze. Okay, on to actions. The ghost has an attack called Withering Touch. Plus 5 to hit, 5 foot of range, and around 17 damage on hit. 46 plus 3. Not too bad for a CR4 creature, although I doubt DMs are going to use this outside of a last resort, and you'll see why in a moment. The ghost can also use an action to go to or from the ethereal plane. This is interesting, and using its ethereal sight feature, you can pretty easily have the ghost pop in and out of the ethereal plane, adding more challenge to a fight. So far, so good. Nothing too ass play yet. The walking through walls thing can be kinda unfair, but it's still balanced because the DM's using it. Alright, what do we have left? The ghost's next ability is its horrifying visage. Visage?
Visage.
I don't know. This is where things start to take a turn for the worst. Each non-undead creature within 60 feet of the ghost must make a DC 13 wisdom saving throw or be frightened for a minute. That's not actually that bad. Being frightened for a minute is an interesting condition, and while it can be a little detrimental to your melee players, it can also be an interesting challenge, especially players who decide to use wisdom as their dump stat. If the save fails by 5 or more, the target also ages 1d4 times 10 years. That's where this ability crosses the line and becomes a little weird. You heard that right. Years. If I roll a 4, depending on your race, your character either just died or went from young to middle-aged. Or if you're an elf, didn't feel like anything at all. Like in Aarakocra in 5e, they lived like 40 years. Even rolling a 1 is aging your character 1/4 of its lifespan. And sure, DC 13 isn't that high, especially for a challenge rating 4 monster. But when I was running this, my players were level 8, and 2 of them failed it. Luckily, only 1 failed by 5 or more, but still, never think that it's out of the possibility. How do you even justify a character aging over half of its natural lifespan? Like, mechanically, does it change anything for the character? No? Maybe? I don't know. How do you even rectify this? Like in a game like Savage Worlds Adventurers Edition, I could just give my players the old hindrance and kind of move on. 5e simply does not have the systems in place to handle something like this, and so I ignored it within my session. The final ability is one that I dread talking about. It's the Ghost Possession move. It recharges on a 6, but it being recharging doesn't really matter if it hits. A target within 5 feet of the ghost must make a DC 13 Charisma saving throw. That's pretty low for a saving throw, especially for your CR4 creature, which we've already been over as it's the same DC as the Horrifying Visage. But you can never rule out DCs because there's always a chance that your players roll lower than it. The Banshee, for example, has a DC 13 Charisma saving throw, and it's seen as a TPK threat in the Lost Mines of Phandelver, especially when you hit it at around a level 3. It can be an issue. Even in high level games, there's still a chance that somebody can roll low. I know, it happened to me. In my campaign where I was running for 4 level 8 characters, and we had 2 people fail the DC 13 Charisma saving throw. So it can happen, never rule it out. So what happens when they do roll low? Well, it's a lot. First, the ghost disappears. Then the target becomes incapacitated and loses control over their body. It's interesting to note that while the ghost takes control of the body, the player is still aware of their surroundings. While the ghost is in the body, it cannot be targeted by attacks, spells, or other effects, except for ones that turn undead. The ghost retains its alignment and mental stats, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Outside of the mental stats, the ghost now uses the player stats, although it doesn't gain access to the target's knowledge, class features, or proficiencies. The possession lasts until the body hits 0 HP. The ghost can also end it as a bonus action, or the ghost is forced out by something like Dispel Evil and Good. When the possession ends, the ghost pops out near the body. The character regains control, and the person who is possessed gains immunity to this specific ghost's possession ability for 24 hours. Not all possession abilities, just that specific ghost possession ability. The immunity also works if the target succeeds the initial saving throw, although it doesn't really tell you that until the end of the ability. So if you're a DM like me who doesn't really read the whole ability and just scans for that DC 13 wisdom saving throw, this is a good thing to note. So what's the problem with the possession ability? Well, everything. Let's start with the saving throw. DC 13 Charisma saving throws are actually pretty generous for most classes, as 4 of them have it as its spellcasting ability. In addition, the Charisma has the second most skills tied to it, with 4 using Charisma. It's only beat out by Wisdom and Intelligence, but for most groups, stuff like Deception and Persuasion and Intimidation are going to be more useful than Animal Handling, Survival, and Nature. That's not to say that those skills can't be super important for a specific campaign, but I would wager that most groups use more Deception, Persuasion, and Intimidation than they do those skills. So this adds up to a DC 13 Charisma check not being that bad for most players to hit. But let's say that you are a low Charisma Barbarian, or in the case of my game, a low Charisma Druid. 2 of my players in my campaign dumped Charisma to help extend the idea that they were kind of outsiders, and weren't really down with the customs of the land, and were also a little standoffish. This allows for the better link between in-world ideas and out-of-world mechanics, but that's a topic for another day. What happens when they failed the check? Well, the game becomes unfun for that player. The text says the target is incapacitated and loses control of its body. Now, normally incapacitated creatures can still move, but I would assume the text to loss of control of its body mean that they can't. So instead, the player gets to sit while the DM controls their character. Or if the DM grants them control of their character and says, go hit everybody else, that can also work. But that's more of a DM call anyway, and if we're running it raw, the DM would gain control. But let's go for an extreme example. Let's just say you put one ghost in a room and have your players fight it. What happens when the ghost takes control of just one player? Well, the combat just kind of ends unless you do one of 2 things. Your first option is to have a cleric or paladin in the party who can turn undead or dispel evil and good. But not every party has a cleric or paladin in there, let alone one who has the spell on hand at any given time. Your other option is to literally beat the shit out of that character until they have 0 HP, then fight the ghost as it pops pops out of the unconscious body. These options are not ideal, as forcing a party to have a cleric, a paladin, or a subclass of a caster that has a certain spell is generally frowned upon in most cases. In no case is this fun for the players, so somebody should be having fun, right? Well, what about the DM? Well, he now has a unit that is quite possibly worse than before, and even harder to run. D&D is by no means an easy game to run. I've run a couple alternatives to Dungeons & Dragons, and each have their own downsides, but D&D is by far the most complicated. My desktop normally has around 8 different windows over 2 monitors of stuff to run a single combat-heavy session. So when your DM suddenly has a new character to keep track of, well, that sucks. In addition, the ghost doesn't get access to a few key things. 1, the target's knowledge, 2, the target's class features, and 3, the target's proficiencies. Let's start with the easiest to break down and move to the hardest, starting with the proficiencies. Not having the target's proficiencies mean that we have a huge problem. Any character wearing armor gives the ghost disadvantage because the ghost doesn't have proficiency with that armor type. That means disadvantages on ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls that require strength or dexterity. I will say that Jeremy Crawford in a tweet said the DMs decide what proficiency the creature has during play, so the DM can make a game time decision. Mostly if you're going to run a little bit more of a flavorful ghost, the king might not know how to wear heavy armor, but the ghost of the captain of the guard definitely would. But that's kind of a game time decision. If we run the ghost having no proficiencies, they're basically a useless walking pile of borrowed HP meat. They're unable to swing their weapon as well, not only because of the disadvantage that they're getting from their armor, but also because of the fact that they don't get to add a proficiency bonus to their weapon attack. This causes all sorts of problems, but the main one is that the ghost possession just turns into any sane party just downing a party member to get it out. It isn't like the ghost is being able to fight back if it's wearing the target's armor. Anyway, not having the target's class features are also bad. This means that the ghost can't use a martial class's extra attack, and it can't spellcast. What could be a cool way to maybe burn some of your player's core abilities in an interesting way turns out to be unlike what maybe you thought it was. Now, this can be used in interesting ways, as you could throw a player off a cliff and the monk's slow fall feature would not kick in. But for the most part, not being able to use class features adds to the same feeling that not getting proficiencies does, that the possession ability is pretty useless outside of forcing a player to have to use the spell slot to turn the ghost out, or to force the party to beat the ever-living shit out of one player who you have just possessed, because there is no other way out unless the ghost decides that they're going to let the meat sack out. Finally, not having the target's knowledge is the nail in the coffin for this ability. This is a little bit of conjecture, and it's not really defined. We're kind of on the edge of rules, so I'm gonna have to explain myself a little bit. So obviously, this means no ghost could take over a PC and kind of like take their place and do the cool body snatchers type thing, because they don't have the memories and the knowledge of the player, which is what I'm assuming that this means, but it also breaks one other big thing that a ghost could do: use magic items that were attuned to the player. Attuned magic items are usually the strongest out of any magic items, and that means that only one party member can use it at a time to limit sharing of magic items, as well as limits the amount of magic items that you can have on your character, especially the strong ones, because of attunement slots. But attunement is described as this: some magic items require a creature to form a bond with them before their magical properties can be used. This bond is called attunement. During attunement, the creature gains an intuitive understanding of how to activate any magical properties of the item, including any necessary command words. This means that the ghost can't even use the magic items being carried by the players if they're attuned, as they don't have the knowledge to do so. They don't know the command words. They don't understand how to activate the magical properties. But this doesn't extend it to the non-attunement magical items that the possessed person has. So the ghost could still spill the contents of your bag of holding if it wanted to, and if it knew that it had a bag of holding on the person, or it could do a little bit of investigating, I guess. So where does that leave the ghost as a 5e monster? In my opinion, it's kind of bad, like really bad. It's extremely ill-defined, and a lot of its mechanics aren't fun for the player, who just has to sit there waiting for the ghost to unpossess them, or who just had their character aged 40 years. And it's not fun for the DM, who has just gutted a character sheet and taken it from the player instead of having a real challenge rating for a monster when the ghost uses its possession. And like, I hear you saying, well, just don't use the possession ability. And you could, but that would be like running a dragon without the breath. You're taking out a huge core ability of what makes the ghost interesting as a monster. You're taking out its sole ability that is unique to it, as even other undeads have the horrifying visage. Visage. So, the players who are getting possessed aren't having fun. The DM isn't having fun. And the other players around them might be having fun if they're really, really down to beat the shit out of their other possessed player. But I think the Ghost removes too much player agency and doesn't give enough role-playing opportunity for it to be worth running as currently written. Maybe I'll eventually make a homebrew stat block for it, but it's like 5 a.m. when I'm writing this, and I mean, it's like 6 p.m. as I'm recording it, but still, I must sleep. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe. Thank you. Have a good one.